Hello and welcome to Amagi, co-hosted by myself, Nima of economicsjunkie.com, and Dylan Moore of the Volitional Science Network, which you can find on YouTube. We are here to tackle ideas both ancient and modern, in an effort to bring you the tools needed to expand the power of your worldview, making you a more potent entity, professionally, politically, philosophically, or otherwise. We are graciously being hosted by the Think Liberty Network, which you can find at think-liberty.com. This is episode 26, How You Don't Criticize MMT and How You Do. Hi, Dylan.
Hey, Nima.
All right. So we've come across two different articles criticizing MMT, and one of them sucks. And the other one is pretty good, actually.
Yeah, which I'm pretty surprised. Yeah. I want to throw this out there, is that every time, and minus this one good article that we're about to get to, every article or criticism I've ever seen about MMT, I usually get really excited when I see it, because I'm feeling like, okay, I'm ready to hear the good criticism about MMT, and it's always a straw man. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
They always pick a straw man.
Yeah, it's because they're lazy and they don't want to deal with the topic, so they make shit up.
I guess that's sophistry 101.
So, let's start with the first one from the Foundation for Economic Education, written by Desmond Lachman. Or Lachman.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're German. You can't pronounce that right?
Yeah. Which he already made us laugh, so that's good. So
well, and it means laugh man.
Yeah, it does. All right. Proponents of MMT argue that there are no real limits to increased U.S. public spending. They presuppose that the U.S. government will always be able to finance itself at low interest rates and grow its way out of any debt problem. Okay, first
Straw
of all...
man.
Yeah, they don't say that there are no real limits to increase public spending, because real resources are the limit to public spending, as every MMTer will tell you within 2 minutes of conversing about MMT with them. But anyway, surprisingly, the MMT proponents overlook two factors that make it highly improbable that U.S. interest rates would stay low indefinitely if the government were indeed to increase public spending with abandon.
I gotta interrupt already. So there's two words here that have already irked me, and it's almost like the libertarian style of CNN. I know that's a low blow, but right at the beginning it says they presuppose that the U.S. government will always be able to finance itself at low interest rates. What's this presuppose word supposed to mean? Is that kind of like when the mainstream media goes, well, Trump might be out this time. Oh, maybe the Mueller investigation found something. It's like, yeah, are you going to actually say something?
If true.
Yeah. And so then he turns around and says, well, MMT proponents overlook two factors that make it highly improbable that the U.S. interest rates would stay low. Well, are you committing to the idea or not?
He hasn't talked to any MMT proponents. He's just making shit up. But he's not saying they've made the case, and here's the case. They just presuppose, so they just I guess came across it in a dream or a vision, told them these things. This blinds them to the very real risk that by being fiscally irresponsible, the U.S. would in time get itself into economic trouble, as so many budgetary undisciplined countries have done before. No, they're not blind to it. You just never talk to any competent MMT people.
I mean, I don't want to turn this into like a spot the fallacy game, but goddamn the non sequitur. He doesn't show that what any MMTer is saying is fiscally irresponsible. He just takes it. He just says, "Okay, it's highly improbable that we could do X. Therefore, they're blinded. Yeah, therefore, they're blinded by their being fiscally irresponsible."
Because I say so. Yeah. Which is, of course, I guess we should just briefly. I mean, we cover this. MMTers don't say that you should be fiscally irresponsible. They say that the limitation to U.S. economic growth is real economic resources, and if the government deficit grows too large, then it will it'll create too much demand for limited resources and create inflation. So that's the limitation that MMT is very well aware of. The first point they overlook is that the US is already at full employment, as indicated by the fact that US unemployment is currently at its lowest rate in the past 50 years.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, the grave swap in logic. Okay, so they overlook that the U.S. is already at full employment because it's at the lowest it's been in 50 years. Well, if in the last 50 years there's never been full employment, your sentence is a contra-fucking-diction.
And the current U6 unemployment rate is at...
It's a joke.
Well, I mean...
Oh, the U6. I'm sorry, you said the U6.
The U6 is a little more realistic,
yeah.
And it's at 8.1% at the moment. And before the 90s, the U6 unemployment rate was the unemployment rate. And there was a time when 10% unemployment was considered a depression. So we've just changed the definitions of what's bad and what's good, and so everything's great now.
Well, and it's also worth pointing out that just because you're employed doesn't mean you're doing well.
Yeah, you're in a shitty job, you're trying to make
three shitty jobs.
3 jobs.
Yeah.
And this goes back to something that Warren Mosler recently, or somebody reposted, I think Steven with Real Progressives posted it, and maybe it would be interesting to just read that out real quick if we can find it.
I can paraphrase it well enough, because I think I've heard him say this on a recording somewhere, is that, he maybe even said it to us, I don't remember, is that it's been so long since we've seen a good economy, this is paraphrasing Warren Mosler, that I think it's worth describing what a good economy is. A good economy is when employers have to fight for employees because the unemployment is so low. That
exactly.
That employees
everybody
are
wants
such
to hire you.
Yes, employees are
They'll
such
train you.
Yes.
Whatever it takes. They hire students before they get out of school. You can change jobs if you want to because other companies are always trying to hire you. That's the way the economy is supposed to be, but that's all turned around for one reason, which I'll keep coming back to. The budget deficit is too small. As soon as they started tightening up on deficits many years ago, we transformed from a good economy where the people were the most important thing to what I call this crime against humanity that we have today. So what you do is you target full employment because that's the kind of economy everybody wants to live in. And the right size deficit is whatever deficit corresponds to full employment. That's what he said in some talk in Italy, I guess. Oh, wow, that was 2014, so he didn't even say it very recently. But I just saw it, and I think it's a good reminder that we really have no idea what a good economy looks like. And so we've become so used to this mediocrity, whatever the right word is.
First one was right.
So,
and I want to add this too, which is looking at this from a libertarian standpoint. Part of the aspect of the free market is that the employer is free to hire or fire you, and the employee is free to get the job or to quit. Now, that's true if there's enough employment to go around. If there's not enough employment to go around, you kind of, I mean, I'm really misusing the word slave, so don't mistake me for using the socialist view of wage slave. But you kind of become a slave to your employer because you're like, look, I can't quit because there's no other option. I got to put up with whatever shit I'm putting up with this employer because there's no other place for me to go.
Right. Well, I mean, austerity is a very sophisticated form of slavery. When the Brits went into Africa and started forcing the indigenous people to work, the way they did it is they would impose a tax and make sure that they don't have any of the money needed to pay the tax. So then they had to work in the mines for them. So it's not too far off to draw that comparison.
Good point.
And to use the S word, I guess. Okay, in those circumstances, so he's now saying the full employment that we apparently have, engaging in fiscal...
We're back in the article, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
In those circumstances, engaging in fiscal pump priming at this late stage of the economic cycle would risk rekindling inflation by creating a situation of excess aggregate demand. Well, okay, let's try it out. You know, you're making something up. You say we risk rekindling inflation. If we do, then okay, then we cut the deficit, etc. Presumably, markets would anticipate the inflation risk, presumably, and soon begin demanding from the government higher interest rates to protect them from that risk.
And as we've gone over 8 million times, the interest rates are not what control this.
Well, also, yeah, the market doesn't control the interest rate that the government pays. The government controls the interest rate because the interest rate paid on bonds depends on the rate set by the Fed. The very short-term rates are set directly by the Fed, and the very long-term rates are a reflection of speculators' expectations of future Fed policy. But as the Fed just declared a fixed 0.25% interest rate for eternity, then you would have none of this nonsense. You would have very stable interest rates for every maturity over the long run.
And then we might actually see what the Austrians call the cost of money. Right? If we fix the interest rate, the Fed fixed the interest rate of 0.25, and the in quotes private banking sector was free to say, okay, we want to charge such and such interest rate for profit, then we might actually see what the cost of money is. Whereas right now, we just see the private banking system chase around whatever the Fed is setting at the interest rate.
Right now, it's a combination of two, right? There might be market factors when the private banks make private loans, but at the same time, they always have to chase the risk-free rate. So you have both factors. You can never really tell which is which. The second overlooked point is that the U.S. is already the world's largest creditor country and would become an even larger creditor country if it were to increase the size of its budget deficit.
What does he mean by creditor here?
Does he mean debtor? I think he actually used the wrong word here. But anyway, according to the IMF, the U.S. currently has a negative net international investment position of around 9 trillion, or more than 40% of GDP. The IMF further estimates that on present policies, the U.S. net debtor position would rise to more than 12 trillion, or around 50% of GDP by 2023.
Is he talking about the trade deficit?
Yeah, I think he really means a debtor. I think he really used the wrong word here. Because otherwise, why would it be an issue if we were a large creditor country, meaning people owe us money? Then why could we not go into debt, to use his terminology?
Okay.
So the U.S. isn't a debtor country. The U.S. makes its own currency, and all the foreign bondholders hold bonds that the U.S. pays off in its own currency. So that's fundamentally different from a country that cannot create U.S. dollars but owes U.S. dollars, for example. It's constantly confused by mainstream economists, and people like this guy are no exception, I guess.
Well, let's take what I think he's trying to say, which is it's an issue that, what is it, 40 or 50% of GDP, this $9 or $10 trillion amount, is actually held by foreign entities. That's essentially what he's saying here, right?
Well, he's got a chart here, U.S. net international investment position. He has U.S. liabilities versus U.S. assets. But I don't know what includes it. Are those private or are those public liabilities? That's not explained.
Okay, I guess I can't read this guy's mind.
Yeah, we'd have to. He'd have to clarify that a little bit. The United States during the Reagan years was no stranger to the twin deficit problem of a high budget deficit leading to a high external trade deficit. Okay, there's no such causality. He's making that up, right? He's saying high budget deficit leads to a high trade deficit. There is the real risk that further increasing the budget deficit would exacerbate the twin deficit problem from which the United States already suffers.
He hasn't explained why it's suffering. Like he just pointed out some numbers, but why is it a problem?
Yeah, as we've explained before, if you run a current account deficit, then you're draining your private sector of net private savings, and you have to run a public sector deficit
to make up for it.
So that your private sector can grow. If your private sector doesn't grow, you'll have austerity, you'll have recessions, depressions. You can look at any country that has a current account deficit and tries to balance its budget or even achieve a budget surplus. See Greece, for example. It would do so mainly by reducing the level of U.S. savings, and worsening the U.S. savings investment imbalance. There's no such thing as a U.S. savings investment imbalance. Every investment creates savings. So it's economic illiteracy, I think, that prompts him to come up with such a term. When a bank makes a loan, that creates a deposit, and a deposit creates savings. So especially if somebody invests, so if somebody borrows money to invest in machinery, then that type of spending by definition constitutes savings because it's not consumed. If that were to occur on a sustained basis, it would be fanciful to think that foreign investors would lend indefinitely to the United States at a low interest rate.
What does that mean?
Foreign investors don't lend. Yeah, foreign investors don't lend to the U.S. at a low interest rate. The U.S. Creates money out of the U.S. imposes a tax in U.S. dollars, spends money into existence, then floods the market with reserves, and wants to create a risk-free interest rate. So it sells some bonds into the market and drains the market of reserves so as to fix the interest rate at whichever level the Fed has determined in its most recent quarterly meeting. They want to fix the interest rate, which is currently somewhere around 2.5 or 2.75%. And then those bonds are also purchased by foreign investors so they can earn some interest in US dollars. They don't lend money, they purchase bonds as investment vehicles. Okay. That would especially be the case if higher US external trade deficits were also to force the US dollar lower. All right, cool story. Hopefully, modern monetary theory is but another passing fad with little policy relevance. If not, we should fear for our children who will have to pick up the pieces of yet another misguided economic policy.
Coup de grace. We're done. It's over.
What about the children, bro?
It's over. The podcast is done. What are we going to do?
I guess we hate children. Yeah, it's very emotional and very dramatic. But I think he should try to pick up the pieces of his misguided experiment of writing an MMT article. That's my opinion. But anyway.
So, I just want to conclude on that this is the perfect example of what I said at the beginning, is every MMT criticism, minus the one we're about to read, is just this like heaping mound of straw man after straw man after straw man. And I mean, my favorite part about this was that the first point they overlook is that the U.S. is already at full employment, as indicated by the fact that the U.S. unemployment is as low as it's been in 50 years. Did you hear the words that came out of your mouth? Or, I mean, did you read the words that you typed up on the screen? That's, I mean, so logically invalid, I can't even see
straight.
Probably had a monkey type.
So no.
So, can't we have... Nima, can we please have better criticism than this?
Let's see.
Okay.
All right. So, Colin Roche is an investment advisor and a blogger. He's one of my favorite bloggers, actually, one of my favorite financial bloggers. And he writes a lot about MMT, and he's also written his own paper about how the monetary system actually works. And he's pretty critical of MMT at times, but he also appreciates the accurate empirical aspects of MMT. So,
and this is from pragmaticcapitalism.com.
Yeah, post the links in the show notes. Pragcap.com. He wrote an article, MMT's True Colors Appear. Modern monetary theory, aka MMT, has hit the mainstream on some liberal And some liberal politicians like AOC, that's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in case people didn't know what that is, are giving it full-throated endorsements. I need to stop playing Mr. Politically Correct with this idea. It is dangerous, and we need to start saying that outright. Now, I've been generally fair over the years. I was very critical of conservative Austrian-style economics for years, when they were pushing the narratives about how QE would bankrupt us and cause hyperinflation. If anything, I've probably leaned closer to the left than anywhere else over the past 10 years because I called for 2 trillion deficits coming out of the crisis. So I don't think I can be fairly accused of political bias here, since I'm criticizing a left-wing school of economics 10 years into a recovery when they're calling for a massive expansion of government. Now, as a risk manager, I tend to always be on the lookout for tail risks. So there's a chance that I'm overreacting here, but not without merit. After all, MMT has shown its cards in recent months, and they look a hell of a lot like a 2-7 offsuit.
What's a tail risk?
Actually, I don't really know, honestly. But I do know what a 2-7 offsuit is.
Right, a bad poker hand.
Right. First, there was their endorsement of the Green New Deal, the rollout of which we can charitably describe as a dumpster fire. Remember, this plan has been estimated to cost anywhere from 6 to 90 trillion. It is by any measure a massive increase in the size of the US government. So, just to interject here, the Green New Deal is, of course, the idea that the people proposing it know exactly what's wrong with how we're consuming resources and how we live our lives and how we're driving cars and how we have cows on farms and in order to stop the pollution of the earth with this horrible natural gas called CO2, we need to stop using fuel and give everyone an electric car, etc., etc. I mean, it's complete and total top-down, imposed socialist-style planning, essentially.
Did you hear what the founder of Greenpeace said in response to that?
Yeah, Patrick Moore. Yeah.
Yeah, I pulled the tweet up. I'm going to read it. This is so the founder of Greenpeace, who's no longer involved with Greenpeace, said this in response to AOC's Green New Deal. He says, "You pompous little twit. You don't have a plan to grow food for 8 billion people without fossil fuels or get food into the cities. Horses? If fossil fuels were banned, every tree in the world would be cut down for fuel for cooking and heating. You would bring about mass death."
But the horse farmers would do well, I guess.
Yeah, but the planet will be saved and things will be better and blah.
Right. So, I mean, this is really an important, I think, because technically MMT has nothing to do with this
Green New Deal,
CO2 climate change freakout cult. You know, conceptually, it doesn't have anything to do. But the people on the left, and this is exactly what you and I have been talking about a lot, that MMT can be abused for political purposes. And this is a prime example. We want to have a Green New Deal because we've swallowed this global climate change CO2 catastrophic man-made climate change freakout cult religion, and we want to do something about that. And so we're going to just spend massive amounts of money to combat the supposed problem that we haven't researched, that we know nothing about, that we're just taking corporate talking points corporate talking point promoters at their word, and it's a disaster.
And we want to turn off all energy use.
Yes, because it's bad. It's the new form. It's a new form of Puritanism. It's a new form of austerity.
Puritanism wasn't all about killing everybody on the planet. So I don't think that was fair.
True. Sorry, Puritans. Didn't mean to offend you, but this is a global cult that that is going to impose austerity through the back door, as I've said many times. Like, because the left is against austerity, this will in effect be total austerity. If you can't drive cars anymore, if you're not supposed to have children anymore because they're breathing too much, if you can't have cows, etc., etc., etc. I mean, there's no CO2 is
fundamental part of everything that we do, both biologically and in terms of energy consumption. Everything.
It's produced by organic entities, and it is fundamentally an assault on life, and that's what it comes down to. And it's unscientific to the nth degree, and we've talked about this before. I've read from peer-reviewed science that completely debunks this religious fundamentalist cult and these moral preeners who
nice.
haven't read a single scientific peer-reviewed research paper on the topic and keep parroting talking points from Al Gore and from CNN and from the UN
Daily Show or fucking whatever
high priesthood of intragovernmental panel of climate change, etc., etc. This is not science, folks. This is a religion in the making. And it's a new fundamentalist religion in the making.
And what you said about austerity nails it on the head. And I think this is where he starts to go with his criticism of MMT, is that, honestly, austerity can come in two forms. One form is, what most MMTers will say is, you don't have enough private sector net savings within your economic structure. The other thing is you don't let anybody make anything.
Exactly.
Right? Because the answer to inflation is that, if we increase the money supply or we increase the private sector net savings, if a simultaneous resource utilization occurs with that, that's the inflation control. And if you get to the point where, okay, all the resources are utilized / everybody's employed and you keep adding money, you get inflation. Well, if you destroy, stop having kids, stop driving cars, stop making stuff, stop having any sort of economy, well, you've just destroyed anything that you could buy.
Right. It's
there aren't any resources to utilize.
It's a bad deal. And this is how they get the majority of the so-called progressive leftist MMT crowd. This is where the neoliberal agenda has successfully swallowed any and all of their attempts to prevent austerity. When people promote this green cult.
Green crap.
Okay. So let's
continue.
Read on here. As this policy was debated, the discussion turned to how MMT would control inflation if all this government spending happened to cause it. MMT didn't have a very coherent answer because they don't have a very coherent theory of inflation. MMT rightly says that the US government is constrained by inflation and not by how much money it has. But they don't really know what that inflation limit is.
Well, Warren Mosler just said so, but go ahead.
Yeah. In this sense, they're like the person who knows that they'll be bankrupt when their bank account hits zero, but they can't count, so they'll never know when they're bankrupt. So I personally, I don't know which MMT theories or which MMTers he's talking about here particularly, but certainly, he may have a point. If the Green New Deal destroys a bunch of resources, productive resources, fossil fuel, etc., cars using fossil fuel, and combine harvesters, etc., then that would reduce production, and that could cause inflation if it's obviously coupled with the massive increase in spending. That's all wasted on these green religious cult-driven projects. For years, MMT has been coy.
I want to say something about energy again, real quick. Is that when you hear me and Nima really trashing this in quotes green stuff, and we're talking about how they want to turn all the energy off, someone might say, okay, well, what about solar and wind and blah 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 blah? Well, I want to bring some historical perspective to this, because
those are very old technologies.
Yeah, well, because there's really three phases. Maybe you could say four, and I'll talk about that when I get there. There's really three phases in history that we know of of energy. There was a time when energy was the result of human muscle or slaves, where if you wanted something done, you had to get humans to physically use their muscles to do it. After that, there was animal power, where you could say, okay, let's hook up a plow to an ox, or let's hook up a donkey to a mill, or something like this, where the animal muscle, which is much stronger than our muscles, can have their energy be harvested to do whatever it is we want to do. The phase after that was chemical energy, where you could say, okay, we've discovered coal or we've discovered oil, and by burning the coal or burning the oil, we can release the chemical energy to do whatever we want. And the contrast between human and animal and chemical, it's like not even the same fucking planet, literally. I mean, we use the chemical stuff to get off the planet. And, I mean, one way to think about it is we all drive cars. And back in the day, if you wanted to get somewhere, you had to walk, unless you were super rich and you owned a horse or something. We were able to take a gallon of liquid and send ourselves 60 miles an hour down a highway. And almost everybody has the ability to afford it and do it. That's where chemical, the ability to release energy from chemicals has brought us. And the fourth one was nuclear energy, where you're actually, splitting the atom, or if we get the fusing them together. But I think you can roughly lump that into the same chemical format if we're looking at this historically. And so what this Green New Deal is prescribing is to say, okay, take away the last 200 years of progress, which has leapt us out of essentially the Dark Ages. And like the founder of Greenpeace pointed out, you're just going to starve the entire planet.
It's austerity.
Yeah.
That's the goal. I mean, not of the people who are being used as useful pawns, but the neoliberal agenda behind it is austerity. For years, MMT has been coy about their theory of inflation and what they would actually do if inflation got high. But this morning, we got a FT op-ed by 3 MMT thought leaders specifying their response, and boy, is it a doozy. Here are some snippets about how they'll control inflation. If inflation is rising because large corporations have decided to use their pricing power to increase profit margins at the expense of the public, reducing demand may not be the most appropriate tool. We must also confront the fact that the fossil fuel, real estate, defense, and financial industries are too large, too dirty, and eat up too much of our natural resources. They must be shrunk one way or another. Another way to offset excessive demand pressure is to tighten environmental and other forms of regulation.
Oh, yeah, that'll help.
Oh, yeah. To address this failure, the Congressional Research Service, as well as other budget advisory organizations, will need to be enlarged to do the analysis necessary to find the right mix of inflation offsets that best move forward the task of decarbonizing our economy. What?
What?
What MMT? I want to know. I want to know who these people are who are coming up with this horse shit. What does this have to do with MMT? Our principal policy recommendation is a job guarantee. Okay, well I can.
I'm behind that one.
That said, we are not against one or more agencies being given additional tools to collectively manage demand on a discretionary basis. So he writes here, in summary, price controls, actively busting up the largest parts of the U.S. economy, lots more regulations, more government agencies, a job guarantee, full discretion for price setting by more government agencies. I'm not even sure what to say. They think they can control high inflation through price controls, more government, and a job guarantee? Is there any evidence that all of this would work? We know from South American economies that have attempted similar policies that the results tend to be mixed, if not disastrous. I am tempted to throw the big bad S word at them, but that might be too much. But make no mistake, if this smells a hell of a lot like South American style socialism, then you're right. That's exactly what this is. And we need to recognize that this is an extremely dangerous view. I did it. I guess I couldn't control myself. This is socialism.
I agree with him.
Yeah.
Well, based on this new Green Deal and these whack-ass responses that like I said, I want to know who these people are too. I clicked on the link, but I guess I got to register to get in, and I didn't want to do that right now.
Ooh, paywall.
Oh, a paywall? Oh yeah, great. Other than the job guarantee, which I disagree with the way that they've been rolling out the job guarantee.
Yeah.
Other than that, this is total poppycock gobbledygook, especially that one that says that the right mix of inflation is to decarbonize our economy.
Right. And, we just need to have some experts sit around a table and top down come up with the right mix and decarbonization, etc.
This is why the Soviet Union was the laughing stock of the fucking world, because they said they could do this and they didn't even get close.
Right. This is exactly an example. So what he's in the end, what he's criticizing here is a political abuse of MMT. I wouldn't say he's abusing MMT, and I think the title is clickbaity when he says MMT's true colors appear. But he definitely points out how certain politically motivated groups are abusing MMT, and in part, I would say, misrepresenting MMT in order to push an agenda. And that's exactly the agenda that they're pushing is the exact opposite of what you and I have been proposing. Even though we both agree on MMT, like we've been saying many times, there are two different directions you can go with MMT. You can MMT, in summary, to make it easy to understand, MMT just says that currently under the austerity conditions that we're in, the deficit is too small. There are two ways to increase the deficit. One is by increasing government spending. The other is by lowering taxes. Personally, my political opinion is I'm a libertarian, and I don't want a big government, and we have a bunch of taxes all over the place, so we can cut a lot of taxes to increase the size of the deficit. And
free up
resources,
free up the private sector to do its job, because the private sector is so hamstrung, particularly in the sense of employment. I mean, ask any small business owner how they feel about having employees, and they'll just laugh in your face.
Well, you can totally see the difference in attitudes, right? My attitude is I don't know what people should do. I do know that it's wrong to steal from people and to force people to give up their resources, to give up their money, and throw it down a giant black hole of nothingness, aka the IRS. And I think that people should be given the freedom to consume and invest as they wish with their money to the extent possible. And these people believe that they know that prices should be so-and-so, that the following corporations need to be busted up, that need to be reduced because someone at some organization told them so. I mean, this is a Huxleyan nightmare of experts sitting around a table and planning every single aspect of our future. That's where this is going. And
the planning includes we all die.
Well, yeah, I mean, except for
the guys planning,
the elites,
right?
Yeah, and it just goes to show you, when people like you and I, when we support MMT, we do not support a political viewpoint. We're just recognizing the mechanism of how the monetary system functions and works. And what you do with it is completely, it can differ vastly based on your political philosophy. And if your political philosophy is, I know what's best for everyone, and I know that CO2 is dangerous, and I know this, and I know that, and people need to do so-and-so, and people need to change their lives in this manner and that manner. I mean, to me, that is a psychotic attitude, quite frankly.
Well, it is a psychotic attitude.
If that's
I
your
don't think it
attitude,
has to be like whether.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be to you. That just is. That's an accurate description of a psychotic attitude.
But if that's your attitude, then MMT is just fuel to the fire. Then it says, wow, yeah, give me. Let's do it all. Let's do all the great things that my genius can come up with and make the world a better place. The road to hell is paved with good intentions is such a true statement. And the other side of the story is just, do we want to give people freedom to do what they want to do in their lives, and MMT can help us with that as well. We just go in a different direction, in a completely different direction, politically diametrically opposed to all of this. And I think just by comparing these two directions, who both use MMT, you can see that MMT is in and of itself a very neutral position. It doesn't make policy prescriptions. People use it to make policy prescriptions, but in and of itself, it's just a theory, and a pretty accurate theory of how the monetary economy works. Anything else that you wish to add?
No, I guess not, it's a little bit. Yeah, I do want to say it this way: is that the MMT description, like you said, it's theory, but it's a pretty accurate theory. I think you need it in order to make prescriptions, because if the theory is accurate, that means you need to understand it in order to make any prescription. Whether your political view is to increase the size of the government or to decrease the size of the government, increase spending or decrease taxes, you still have to accurately understand what's going on to make any sort of useful first analysis and useful idea of what to do about it. And if we're just going off the deep end, whether that's Paul Krugman or whether that's Austrian economics or the neoclassical version or whatever, it's impossible to make an accurate or a decent prescription. And it's unfortunate right now because when you first look at MMT, it looks like socialist talk. Therefore, it scares away anybody who's into freedom, and it attracts everybody who's into socialism. And so it's become dominated by socialists, and then Cullen Roche here comes out with this, I think, very good criticism of what most MMTers are saying and how they've totally bungled it up with this Green New Deal garbage. That's, in quotes, the MMT crowd, and it's just me and Nima over here jumping up and down going, hey, wait a minute.
Exactly.
There's another way to look at this.
There's no doubt about it. Yeah. It's, bad ideas can lead to bad things, and good ideas can be turned into bad ideas if they're abused and utilized in the service of control freaks and sociopaths and environmental religious cultists like our dear global warming cult.
Oh, hey, speaking of that, I'm in Washington State, and our wonderful governor, pay by the mile, Jay Inslee, is running for governor on a climate change platform. Did you hear about that?
No, I didn't hear about it.
Oh, yeah. I only hope he gets it just so he can get the hell out of Washington. Fucking pay per mile fucking tax. There's some more austerity for you. Ugh.
That's what it is. There's more and more taxes everywhere, but it's totally no austerity, bro. Even though it's the definition of austerity. That's what sparked the Yellow Vest revolts in France, and people were so pissed off that they had to withdraw those plans for the time being. They'll reintroduce them, I have no doubt about it. But it's austerity through the back door, and the people who call themselves progressives, who promote this austerity through the back door, through this climate change cult, are promoting austerity and not doing the world a favor.
Well, I think it's even worse austerity than economic austerity. Because
it is.
I mean, it's literally like of
it's
energy.
Religious restrictionism. It's really what it is. And they need to be shamed and embarrassed and called out and ridiculed every time they open their loud mouths. And they belong delegated to the lunatic fundamentalist amateur fringe, where they belong.
They can go hang out with the Scientologists.
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, at least the Scientologists have no giant socialist plans to take over the economy and take our cars away. You know, they just want to own their own planets one day or whatever they believe in. I don't know. With that, see, we've come full circle. We've come from MMT through climate change to Scientology. With that, this has been Amagi, co-hosted by myself, Nima Majur of economicsjunkie.com, and Dylan Moore of the Volitional Science Network, which you can find on YouTube. And we are, of course, graciously being hosted by the Think Liberty Network, which you can find at think-liberty.com. Thank you very much for listening, and we will see you next time.